I love the idea of one system being full of games from generations of legacy, having a ton of NES games, Super Nintendo, PlayStation, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360, and so on and so forth. It's a really appealing thing to have every Dragon Quest game, every Final Fantasy, every Mario, all on one system. However, seemingly the bulk of the time, the remasters that emerge from these are a letdown in many areas and inferior to the originals. Not all the time, of course, there are some good remasters out there, but when it comes to many key classics, I would still much rather play them in their original form. And here's why. Let's start with sprite-based games. Now, developers lately have become pretty good at respecting pixels. Not all the time, sometimes they sneak in a little disgusting option which I just want to tear away because giving people options to be horrendous should not be a thing. Look, whatever sick fantasies you have, lock them away. I don't want to know about them. If you're thinking about smoothing those pixels, I think you should go to jail. What are you in for? Oh, I smoothed some pixels. Get him, boys! That's what's going to happen. Sometimes, though, there is no option, because the default is the smoothing. There's no option to unsmooth them. Case in point, the horrific Grandia HD collection, Grandia 1 and 2. This is not a cheap collection, and what it gives you is Grandia in its worst form imaginable. Everything is oversaturated, everything is smooth to this horrific degree. If you zoom in on elements, you just won't know what they are anymore. They become a blob. I don't know, what is this meant to be? A girl? Or an aubergine? I don't know. Every single part of the presentation is bad here. The portraits are bad, the font is bad, the sprites are bad, and the widescreen doesn't even really work because it shows you more than what you're meant to see. It's just empty, void space most of the time. Very unfond of Grandia HD. However, Grandia 1 is actually a PS1 classic on PS5 and PS4, so you can play a pretty good representation of Grandia, even though the PS1 version is still inferior to the Saturn version, but see, nothing is preferable here. If you want to play Grandia in its best form, you've got to go back around 30 years and play it on Sega Saturn. It's crazy. Crazy, I say. And you know what? It's time to pick on more RPGs. So Dragon Quest 1, 2, and 3 were ported to mobile in a pretty ugly way, and these games found their way onto the Switch. And I played through all of these just fine. I don't like how they look whatsoever, and they've got key problems, one being that the scrolling and the characters are at different speeds. So your character is moving faster than the screen is scrolling, creating this constant judder anytime there's vertical or horizontal motion, so not a good way to play these games. And this problem carried over into the Final Fantasy Pixel remasters. So in every single one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, your character and the scrolling are not in tandem. Once you notice it, it's a horrible feeling. I do not like these at all. But that's not my main problem with the Pixel remasters. I've got several problems, and the biggest one of all is the text boxes. They just appear. Like there's no animation for any of them. Just text appears in big bulk. There's no feeling of speech. It feels like a step has been missed. I really don't like these. Go back to Final Fantasy IV on PSP, which by the way has way better sprite work. The text boxes there, they have some form of movement. It doesn't just feel like the screen has frozen. I don't like the Pixel remasters. I'd much rather go back to the originals. I think the sprite work is usually better in older versions of those games too. It kind of fails in most regards for me. But let's keep picking on Final Fantasy because almost all the legacy games on modern systems are flat out awful. Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. The first poor thing they do to the presentation is they blur the backgrounds, and then they do the worst possible thing you could do, which is increase the resolution of all the 3D objects. And so you have much lower detail, blurrier backgrounds than the original, but also much clearer character models. It's a strange juxtaposition where everything interactive is way too clear and everything that's not is way too blurry. Nothing feels like it belongs in the world anymore. And you go back to the original where everything was 240p. The character models were 240p. The backgrounds were 240p. So even though the backgrounds are more detailed because they're pre-rendered, they still match together really well because they're the same resolution. Nothing feels out of order, especially when you're on a CRT and everything just kind of melds together really well. But all of that is lost in all the HD versions of this game. And 7 isn't even really the worst. I mean, it isn't good. The FMVs look way lower quality than PlayStation. I hate all the character models. I suppose there are some quality of life things like speeding up the encounters. That's one thing. But that's also just kind of part of the game. And then Final Fantasy VIII is a very funny one, because sometimes the character models are part of the pre-rendered backgrounds. It's like a space-saving tool. And so right here, you can see a blurred background with a character model from the original still intact, and they stand out so strongly compared to all the actual models because they're all in HD for some reason. I would have much rather they just gave us standard 240p. There was no need to remaster anything here. It makes everything so much worse. And then we come to Chrono Cross. And look, I don't hate this release. This gave us Radical Dreamers. That's pretty cool. And when playing in the standard visuals, like yes, you've got many of the problems of Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, but for the most part, it's a little better than they were. But then you also get the more modern mode, which uses AI upscaling. And so instead of blurry backgrounds, you've got mangled backgrounds. I don't know what's happened to a lot of this stuff. It looks kind of watercolory, where details are just smoothed together and mushed up. It's very strange. But if you want to play with the brand new models, you have to use this mode and the brand new fonts and everything. They're all exclusive to this one. I don't know why they didn't let you mix and match some of this. It's bizarre. But yeah, I don't touch this mode. It's not that enjoyable. Much of the time with remasters that are held to their technical limitations and built around them, I want them to maintain that. That's something that should be preserved. That's the entire look. And so for many games, I just want them exactly like this. I'm fine with many raw ports. You don't have to enhance or change things just for the sake of it, especially when they're at the detriment of the actual legacy of the art itself. You know what I've been afraid to say for a few years now? I do not like the Klonoa remakes. I think they are worse in pretty much every way, and I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to kill Klonoa as a franchise by giving it bad press, and they're still worth playing, they're still good games, but Klonoa 1 and 2 are drastically worse, especially Klonoa 2. For some reason, they've just gotten rid of all lighting in this game. Everything is just so brightly lit, and you end up with colors that feel exactly the same. It's just a big splash of the exact same color. And when you look at this scene here, which is just funny now, so in the original PlayStation 2 version, these characters are masked in shadow. You're not meant to know who they are. And are you ready to see how they look in the remake? You just see them. It's crazy. But I feel the game as a whole has just lost all its tone. I mean, look at this scene here. This is the opening level in a dark, gloomy storm, and it feels like we're being lit as if we're on a football pitch or something. The dark caves are unnaturally bright, the water's just this solid blue, and things just generally look worse in pretty much every way. Like, check out this swinging pendulum here. On PlayStation 2, this side here is dark, but as you rotate around the platform, you start to see it in more clear lighting because you're changing where the sun is. Whereas on Switch, it is bright everywhere. Nothing is actually being lit. I don't like it. Don't like it. Klonoa 1 fares a little bit better because this is mostly just a port of the Wii game with slightly brighter lighting, but Klonoa 2, really not fun. And sometimes, visuals were tailored specifically to what that system could do, and many PlayStation 2 exclusives utilize the Emotion Engine with this drastically high fill rate. That's a very specific way of creating transparencies and alpha effects only on the PlayStation 2. So while modern techniques exist to replicate that kind of look, the actual technique they use there doesn't really transfer over to more powerful systems because they can't replicate what PlayStation 2 can do. And interestingly, with Devil May Cry 3, the opening is using a pre-rendered PlayStation 2 scene, as you can maybe tell by the lower resolution, but as soon as it cuts to actual gameplay, Dante's hair is no longer transparent. Look at this. Transparent fringe? Non-transparent fringe. It's just a big block of hair now. And when you compare it to PlayStation 2, you get a very different effect. I don't necessarily hate Devil May Cry HD. I think these are fine ways to play the games. They do miss on some effects like this and a few others. But because it's a fast-paced action game, you don't really tell in the midst of gameplay. Still, it is funny that PlayStation 2 is a lot better in terms of visual quality. And this is true for many other PlayStation 2 games like Silent Hill. In the PlayStation 3 and 360 versions, they can't replicate fog in the same way as PlayStation 2 could because of the Emotion Engine, and so you get very thin and strange-looking fog in these versions of the game. Of course, there are more problems as well, but this was a very big one. Wait, what's that? It's time to hate on some industry darlings? Well, okay. I am not that fond of the Crash Insane trilogy. I think they are fine ways to play the original games, but they are far from replacements because in many ways, especially visually, I think they're flat out worse. What I do like are the cutscenes. I think the cutscenes are much more full of life and energetic and bold. They're really good. But then you cut to the gameplay, and let's use Crash Bandicoot 2 here, and just look at the hub. On PlayStation 1, not only is it far more colourful and full of life, but there's also some really cool effects here, like the blue hue from the portal is coming onto the walls and spilling around and making really convincing lighting, almost like a ray tracing effect, but of course cheated in a PlayStation kind of way. Whereas here on the Switch, it's just grey. It's just grey with a few mushrooms and nothing really to make all these course portals seem different from each other. It's just a couple of elements sprinkled around. You lose the entire vibe. But it's not just in this room. You lose color and personality everywhere. The snow effect outside is way weaker, and the environments are less readable than they used to be. Reflections are just flat out gone. They've made these walls not reflect a thing anymore, and they were really cool on PlayStation 1. Like, look at this right here. I don't like the enemy designs at all. You've gone from this very Looney Tunes inspired game to just realistic animals. Quite disgusting looking realistic animals. It's quite hard to tell that this level here is meant to be in a snowy environment. Like in the original, that's a big snowball chasing you. Whereas now it's just a big boulder covered with a little bit of snow. It's lost the vibe. And okay, this one is definitely nitpicking, I admit that. But in the original, when you finish the level here and you go inside, you're just sheltered from the rain. There's no transition from rain to not raining. You're inside, it's not raining anymore. Makes sense, right? But in the remake, if you stand in this spot here, the rain stops. That doesn't happen in the original. The effect is far more convincing, way back in the late 90s than it is in modern day. And there are so many effects scattered throughout this game that are just generally more impressive in the original PlayStation version. I get it, they were remaking 3 games at once with this one, there's definitely a lot of pressure, and they probably had to avoid all of those small things that Naughty Dog did way back in the 90s. But still, I think as a whole, I don't like this art style. This is an example of a remake just kinda supplanting the original in its availability, even though it's worse, in my opinion, in most ways. This is the version people play, because it's convenient to play. If you were given the option of the PlayStation version, maybe you'd play that too, or instead of, but you can't. This is what you can play. That is the problem with so many remasters right now. So let's hate on another industry darling, Shadow of the Colossus. I so often hear that this is the poster child for remakes. This is how it should be done. I don't like it. This, in my opinion, fails the artistic vision of the original in many ways. It's still a fun game that conveys the gameplay of the original, but the tone is lost. You no longer have this desolate land that feels like no one's been there in years. Now it feels alive and natural. There's this lush vegetation everywhere, and the lighting is completely different. All the Team Ico games, from Ico to Shadow of the Colossus to The Last Guardian, have this overexposed kind of lighting to them, and it's on purpose. This is how you convey what these games are in their tone. Let's just freeze here for a moment. They've gone half the way to implement it. They've made it so the outside is very overexposed, but everything else is very naturally lit. And I don't feel like that's the point of this style. The Last Guardian doesn't work this way. The power of the moment here is lost. Then cut a few seconds later, and you get this very different facial expression, which I think just loses everything about the character. For those who haven't played Shadow of the Colossus, basically Wanda has to do something very dreadful for someone he loves, and I think in the original, you get this sense of being too far gone. There's no looking back now. He's not stoic exactly, he's just kind of accepted it and become numb to it. Whereas in the PlayStation 4 version, that's just a sad look. It's extremely different to what it used to be. But here's another big part of the problem. The PlayStation 3 version is also not perfect. It conveys the visuals extremely well. It's just the PS2 game in HD. But one problem the PS2 game has is it had a very low frame rate. And the game was actually designed around that. It expected the system to slow down, and so all the Colossi would move in tandem with the game's speed being the lower frame rate. And so when you bump that up to 30, suddenly on PlayStation 3, the Colossi are going to be shaking you off far more often and moving more rapid because they are made for the lower PlayStation 2 frame rates. The PS4 game's a lot better with that, but then you lose a lot of the tone. So in my opinion, Shadow of the Colossus on PlayStation 4, beautiful game, technically very impressive, but it doesn't make me feel things. This isn't the piece of art that was the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 version. That one made me emotional to look at. This one, not really. And less of a darling, but I feel very strongly about Panzer Dragoon. I don't like any of the Forever Entertainment remasters and remakes. They are all pretty darn poor. But Panzer Dragoon hits really hard, because the Sega Saturn version gave you this really cool vibe. This opening level here, you have these really cool reflections in the water. It's just this empty ocean, not much going around, but everything that is there stands out really strongly. Whereas in the remake, you get this cheap plastic feeling to everything. Those reflections are gone, and the visuals harm the gameplay as well, because now the cursor overlaps with the dragon, which was never the case in the original. It was a 3D cursor that can move all the way around, and people have told me that they've patched this game over the years, they've made it better. I don't think they have. They've made it better than it was at launch, maybe, but it's still riddled with so many problems and loses all the atmosphere that the original had. And they're currently remaking Zwei, and it looks even worse. And then you've got Front Mission as well, particularly Front Mission 3. And this game is using AI, so many things don't make sense. You've got mechs that aren't in the game, because they've just generated them for this newspaper here. It is buggy, it is broken, it doesn't look good. I'm not a fan of this company. We've reviewed House of the Dead 2 from them. Likewise, loses all the vibe. Likewise, worse. Likewise, doesn't control well. None of them are good. And while we're speaking of AI, we've also got Persona 3 Portable. Now, back on PSP, this was good on the small screen. But you blow it up and all of a sudden, not so much. It's quite a blurry mess. And so how do you put this on modern platforms? You've got to upscale it, right? Otherwise, things are going to look very, very pixelated and blurry. Well, they kind of did the Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 thing, where all the character models are now in HD, so they stand out from the backgrounds, but they also AI upscaled everything as well, and it's a very unnatural look. So let's just freeze here for a moment. You've got the principal delivering a speech, and on PSP it's a pretty blurry scene. There's not much you can do about that, because an HD version of this asset does not exist, and so they AI upscale it, and I don't think this is better. You've got a lot of stuff in this version that doesn't really make sense. There's suddenly patterns that aren't straight shapes anymore. There's parts of the environment that are mangled together. It's not a very good AI upscale, and it's not a very good version of this game. In fact, fans made a much better Persona 3 Portable. They used the PlayStation 2 version being emulated to take brand new screenshots of all these pre-rendered backgrounds, so they're basically replacing them with other versions of Persona 3, and it's really convincing, and very clear, and fun. That's a good way to do it. And now we've got one of the most problematic ones of all time. It's Sonic Adventure DX. And the big problem with this one is the Dreamcast version has never been re-released, whereas the DX version has been on GameCube, on 360, on PlayStation 3, on PC. This is the one that most people have played. And while there are mods to replace many of the assets and restore Sonic Adventure Dreamcast's features, most people will not be doing that. They'll be playing the base game as it is. So why exactly is Dreamcast better? Well, first, the vibes. It just looks better. It's brighter. It makes more sense. Things just look nicer in the Dreamcast version. For example, let's look at the streets here in Station Square. Everything's really muted on GameCube. Things don't stand out as much as they used to. It's just grey now. And then you've got the night scenes, which on Dreamcast look lit. It's as if the city is being lit by street lamps, which it is. Whereas on GameCube, it's like it's daytime apart from the sky's black. They went in and changed every model and texture and visual effect in the game, and it's mostly for the worse. There are very few things that actually look better in the GameCube version. But that's not even really the problem. DX is just filled with bugs. When just capturing for comparison footage, this happened. Going through a loop-de-loop, just thrown out the other end. This barely ever, if ever, happens on the Dreamcast, but Adventure is kind of known for this, because people know this version of the game. It's unreal how much better Adventure 1 is on the Dreamcast. However, on GameCube you do get some new bonus missions, you get Game Gear games, there's still a reason to play this one on some level. It's not completely worthless, but it's not a replacement to the Dreamcast version. Apart from commercially, it very much is. But it's not the only poor Dreamcast port. Another one I really don't like is Skies of Arcadia Legends. Now hold the phone, I know people will be angry about that, but the GameCube version is just kinda worse. People have said over the years that the encounter rate is better on the GameCube, but that is frankly not true. They are the exact same in both versions. The only real difference is the audio quality sounds like this. The Dreamcast version comes on 2 discs, 2 GD-ROMs, and 1 GD-ROM isn't far off the file size of 1 GameCube disc, but 2 of them eclipses it in many ways. And so they had to squeeze it onto 1 GameCube disc and compress so much of this game, and the audio just sounds worse across the board, and this is a godly soundtrack that is diminished greatly from the GameCube's quality. It is true the GameCube has some exclusive content, but the Dreamcast does too. You've got exclusive VMU things, you've got DLC you can get from the Dreamcast store, which you can still get, by the way, by using a homebrew workaround. So with the audio like this, I really struggle to recommend the GameCube version. Dreamcast is better, almost outright. And then we've also got Tales of Symphonia, and Daniel's done a bunch of videos on this, but basically the GameCube version is 60 FPS, but they lost the source code, and so every following version used the PlayStation 2 code as a base, and that was 30 FPS. And so all the HD versions of Tales of Symphonia are 30 FPS, but there are far more problems, including bad upscaling, bad textures, missing transitions, and so much more. Go check out Daniel's videos, they are dreadful in so many ways. But this is a key point. Source code is quite often lost. Many developers, especially Japanese developers, did not archive their stuff in the 80s and 90s. So with Square, a lot of their things have been lost. They can't just re-render the backgrounds from Final Fantasy VII. They don't exist anymore. And when it came to Trials of Mana being re-released, they didn't have the source code. They went to Nintendo, who did have the source code, because they licensed the game originally on the Super Nintendo. That's partially why we end up with so many shoddy remasters. Panzer Dragoon cannot be re-released in a native form, it has to be emulated or remade because the source code no longer exists for those original versions. That's the case with so many of these games. And it's also true the original development teams usually aren't involved with the remaster. Sometimes they are, but usually it's outsourced to someone else, and maybe they don't get the original art style, maybe they see something that could be done differently. But the thing is, these games were made under their technical limitations. They look the way they do because that's how they were made to look. You can make them look better, you can make them more modern, but then you lose the original vibe and art style they were going for in the first place. It's not a compromise to look the way they do, that's just how they look, because they were made under those constraints. It's like using a paintbrush rather than using a digital tool, because that is the art style, that's what you've gone for. Is it compromised because maybe it's lesser in some regard? No, that's just how it is. Many of these examples I've thrown out poison the idea that games are art. We see them as things that can constantly be improved with new tech, rather than just admiring what they were, what they captured in that period, what they made you feel. If you were to remaster the Mona Lisa or something, I think people would be mad at you, because it doesn't need remastering, that's just how it is. I would like a lot more just raw ports. Don't touch anything. Don't even change the resolution. I don't even like N64 NSO because of this, because many games on the N64 use pre-rendered backgrounds or 2D elements, and so you go to Castletown in Ocarina of Time, and it looks horrible. I don't like this. Where's my native 240p option? I would love that. Anyway, thank you for watching. I'm sorry this was a negative one, but something has to be said. Otherwise, I'm gonna explode. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.